Welcome to this panel discussion on sort of tips for applying for DCAships, CAing if you're sort of a bit of a beginner. The session is not intended to be, everyone who is, necessarily on their 40th or something Adj Core, but to have, I guess, a very diverse panel with diverse experiences who can bring, I guess, something different to this discussion. One of our panelists might be running a little bit late, but that's okay. We will get started in the meantime. So I welcome the people that we've got. I might just hand over to them to introduce themselves and just tell us just a little bit about their CA kind of experience and background. Njuguna, do you want to start? I might hand over to you.
All right, am I audible?
You are.
All right, thank you very much, Jess. My name is Macharia. I'm from the African circuit, but specifically the East African circuit. I am from Strathmore University, and yes, I could talk a bit about my previous experiences. I think before lockdown and COVID, I was a career speaker until around 2019 when I started seeing competitions around the region. So my first CA-ship was given to me by a very good friend of mine called Dominic, and I always appreciate him for opening my eyes to the world of adjudicating and CA-ship. So I did adjudicate and CA the Zanzibar Open Debating Championship. It's probably the best tournament, if you asked me, in the world, where you go to the beach and your entire tournament experience is in an island somewhere in an exotic place. And it was probably one of the best experiences of my life. And after that, I did CA the East African Championships. I think that came after that, which was very big at that point because it's one of the largest regional competitions that happened then. Then I think from there, Corona happened just as I was beginning to pick up momentum, and the tournaments moved online. And from then on, I think I've played a couple of online tournaments. Yeah, so after that, then when the environment moved online, I started adjudicating online for reasons probably that were not conducive. So I just judged for a while, and I started seeing, I think I judged for like 3-4 months and I didn't really apply for anything. And then this year I started seeing those applications and I was like, why not just shoot your shot? And I think since then I've gotten a couple of DCA positions. I had the opportunity of being a DCA at Manchester, probably one of the best experiences of my life. I think learning so much from all those great cup members. And I've also Southampton, there's a very, very good bunch of people there. I mean, I'm loving all my cup experiences. They're very educative. I'm very much learning. I also got Cornell Novice Nationals in the American circuit, another opportunity for me just to learn from different people. And I could go on and on because I was also the DC at the Pan-African Championships that were online. So I think since being online, I've gotten a couple, about 6 probably cup positions. And yeah, I think it's taking every day in stride and learning as much as possible from these opportunities. Yeah, that's me and my experiences so far.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And that's really cool that you had such a good Manchester experience. And yeah, it was a great tournament. I enjoyed debating a lot. Namita, if you are happy to go next.
Sure. Hi guys, I'm Namita. I'm probably the newest CA on our panel because I've only CA'd like 3 or 4 times at best. The first time I started CAing was in September when a small Bangladeshi comp asked me to do it. So I've just been CAing in and around the Indian subcontinent. It's quite nice because obviously I get to judge people that I know and definitely newer debaters from the area that I started debating in, which is always quite nice to do. But also because it's online, we've just had the benefit of getting a lot more experienced CAs. So I've learned from Jess, I've learned from Hadar, Lovro, many people that otherwise simply would not have been possible. So yeah, I think that's the best part about CAing online. Specifically, since I started CAing online, it's been even more beneficial for me because most tournaments just tend to have a couple of really old names and then like newer people that are coming up, which I actually think is quite nice because if you don't have that, you essentially just have a bunch of new people that will end up seeing without the experience and learning from older individuals. But since we do get the opportunity and the experience, we learn a lot. So I think that's quite fun.
Awesome, thank you. And I totally agree about the new CAs thing. Like, it's just gets so boring if the same 5 people are CAing every bloody competition. So thank you for that. Stuart, over to you.
Hey, I'm going to presume people can hear me unless you tell me you can't. But my name's Stuart. I debated quite a bit over the past sort of 5 or 6 years in the Australian circuit and various internationals as well. In terms of Adj Core experience, I'm actually somewhat of the opposite, whereby I haven't done a lot of online Adj Coring compared to the amount I did pre-COVID and pre-online debating. That's obviously not to do with my opinion about online debating. It's more just to do with sort of where I was at in my life, starting full-time work last year and everything else. So I did CA one tournament last year, which was online, the Macharia Open in Australia. And then previously to that, I basically CA'd or DCA'd various, mostly BP minis in Australia. I did quite a lot of them. And I also was one of the Adjudication Core members for the Australian Easters competition, which is sort of our national competition, which is in 3v3 format. And then, yeah, I mean, obviously I have things to say as well about, you know, Adj Coring and applications and stuff like that. But in terms of my experience, that's sort of what I have.
Awesome, thanks for that. And finally, Helena, over to you.
Hello, I'm Helena. I am from Tilbury House, which is in Cologne, Germany. I am not debating in the German circuit mostly, but mostly in the Dutch circuit and now obviously in the online circuit. I do beat Namita in the not that many CA shifts because I just had my first CA shift, which was KCL schools, and I am now going to be doing soon something else, which is also super cool. And I have a lot of experience filling out the DCA applications because my strategy is to just fill out everything, and then people, my chances of getting DCAships are significantly higher. So that's working relatively well. So I just hope that those things are working out. They have worked out recently with KCL schools. So I have a lot of experience on helping on how to fill those things out. Not that much about CAing in and of itself, but specifically also just like about the first time experience, because I was scared as hell. Basically stressed the entire tournament through because I just worried throughout, which then I realized was a really dumb idea because the people I CA'd with were absolutely lovely people and everything went well, but I was just panicked throughout the entire experience. But now that I did it once, I'm just like excited to do it again.
Awesome, thanks heaps. And yeah, that's why I really wanted you on this panel, because I think like actually being able to share with people what it's like to, you know, CA for a first time and have that experience fresh and recent is actually extremely valuable. So thanks everyone for those introductions. Well, we'll hop into some discussion then. And initially we can just start in the same order of your introductions, and then I might call on people in a different order for some other questions, and we'll mix it up so not everyone has to speak first all the time. But the first question I want to ask is, so DCA applications, they, in my time, they were just kind of a thing for, you know, when I started debating, they were only a thing for majors. Now we've, I think, had more DCA applications for things like just, you know, your local IV, which I think is really cool to give more people an opportunity to apply for them. So appreciating that DCA apps kind of occur on a spectrum from your biggest tournaments to your kind of smallest ones. Applications are a thing, and people are probably thinking about how they can best approach them. So I'm wondering from your perspective, and the other thing is obviously, you know, they usually look at things like you'll suggest motions. They might ask you to describe your motion setting approach, why you want to apply for that Adj Core. So appreciating a few of you have been in different positions. Some of you have been the person behind, you know, you've been the one assessing those applications. Some of you have potentially been applying for those positions. Some of you have probably had reflections from your friends. But in general, just wondering, yeah, what your perspective is on those, and are there any tips that you can offer, anything that you've learned in your experience? So I might start with the same order that we've spoken before, if you want to kick off.
All right. So I'll try to probably just keep it as concise as possible. I'm like almost like Helena. I think I've just shot my shot at every DC applications I've found. I don't think they are more prevalent. I still think that a lot of competitions are still assigning at the beginning. I still think there are very few comps that are giving these applications to the people, because I think I've searched through between January and maybe April. You'll find maybe only 4 tournaments have opened this year applications, which is still low. But for those that have opened, maybe the things about the applications that I would advise and I think have worked, I think the more experienced CAs could tell us what happens on behind the scenes, but from the ones typing, the what I've done that has worked is, firstly, the first thing they always ask for is your achievements. And I think when it comes to your achievements, you're always sure that it could be a developmental position, but they're still looking for someone who probably has some level of experience. So what I've tended to learn is that you need to prioritize tournaments that you chaired as many rounds as possible. And when you state tournaments, you need to always indicate the size of the tournament, even if they don't ask. I think some of those applications don't allow you to ask, but using the same format you use maybe in an IA application, use that also in a C application. Let the Adj Core know that you have experience in judging, chairing, and especially that the competitions that you've been judging are competitions that are known. So I always advise people who ask me about adjudication, I always tell them, go judge any tournament that is well known. Even if you don't break, just do your best, get good feedback, see if you can share a couple of rounds. And as you develop those sharing experiences, your break is coming, and the more you do tournaments that people are familiar with, the more likely you are to get a leg up with regards to maybe those DCA applications, to the extent that they know that you're probably a chair, because I'm thinking CAs want somebody who can chair around as a DCA. So even if they're picking you, they're looking for a chair who will probably not screw up rounds. So that's the first thing. Always prioritize the achievements that you have on tournaments that are known. 1, 2, always show good chairing experience and the rounds you broke to, how deep you broke, stuff like that. Anyway, 2, motion setting is always a question that comes up, and this one is always the most difficult for me, I think. And I've always never tried to burden myself to set, because they always give 5 motions or 3 motions. They don't have to be all original. I think you can always pick a motion that you thought was extremely good, but also the spread is what I think becomes an advantage here. So you need to understand, when they ask you to say which round you'd suggest, it's not a trick question. It's actually very important, which I came to learn recently, which motion is placed in which round and what. So you always need to make sure that your ability to know how to spread motions is in good, like it's actually good. So maybe a certain motion cannot be used in an in round because it's maybe complex and requires spec knowledge. Some motion is maybe a bubble motion. You could use it in a preliminary round, because just knowing how motions fall in rounds is something that could actively help you. So do more research, ask experienced CAs how motion setting works and all that. The other question that tends to come up in these applications is the stress testing. So I've gone with a more objective stress testing metric. So I always have like a 6-part stress testing process that I always indicate to the CAs. So sometimes they are merged with the motion question, like why would you set a motion and test it? Sometimes they're merged, sometimes they're separate. I think having a standardized way of testing motions is something that could actively help you. And outlining the CAs that you have an idea how motions are tested. So mine is a 6-part process. I'm sure other people have different processes upon which they test motions, but just knowing that indicating that you know how motions are tested could actively help you. And then the other thing I think that is very interesting that I've noticed with the C applications and tends to help me, probably, I don't know, it could probably be different, is that experience in other debate fields tends to assist. What do I mean? They tend to ask if you have any other experience with things like tab, equity, org-com. Those tend to be always something I've seen regular in all these applications. So it looks like having that experience actually does help. So probably being a more holistic debater might help you get these positions much better, rather than just being a career judge or a career speaker. You can also try things like org-com, tabbing and all that. So I think I have 3 tournaments tab experience. I've convened probably 5 tournaments. So I always put those things right there, and it could probably be playing in my favor because as a CAP, you're interacting with a lot of different parts, moving parts of the tournament. You're always with cap, you're always talking tab. Sometimes you're given tab access. You know, some people I hear screw up tabs from the back end, some CAs, because they don't know what to do. So it's always important to have that flexibility and the ability to just be like a jack of all trades in debating, so that you're not screwing up tournaments, or you're able to fit in with either of the groups. So I think those are the experiences tend to be important. So those are the 4 things I think that I usually do when doing the applications. They might be working. I think they are, and probably other people could use some of those to probably boost their applications.
Awesome, thanks for that. And I think they are definitely working, given how much I see your CA bio floating on my Facebook feed these days. So, so that's good. Namita, from your perspective, have you, given your sort of experiences, are they instances where you've applied, or you've sort of had to craft those sort of questions? And even if not, I think considerations about how you might approach something are still very useful in terms of how you think around motions and those sorts of questions.
So I've actually not filled a lot of DCA forms. I quite recently just filled my first one. So thanks for all the information, Macharia. That's actually going to help me a lot. But what I would say in terms of why you should apply and why I think people should go for it, even though they feel underconfident, is I just think a lot of people feel underconfident. So you're probably not the only one that has that degree of nervousness, which means a lot of people that are applying are probably because someone else pushed them, or because they just want to give it a shot. And the worst thing that you can do is get rejected. But even if you get rejected, you're still going to get feedback on your application. You can always reach out. I'm sure most CA teams are more than happy to provide feedback, or at least give a bit of direction on which you can improve. And the second thing I would probably just say is, obviously I've never been in a position where I have to assess DCA applicants, but from what I've heard and from what people have told me, people who are non-cis male just heavily just tend to have things such as imposter syndrome. These are all discussions that we've been having for a really long time. So it's just doubly difficult, or people just hesitate to apply even more. So I just think, especially if you're like a gender minority, or if you're any other minority or language minority perhaps, and you think that maybe some of the questions are just really difficult for you to conceptualize in terms of saying, maybe the question is something that you won't be able to word properly because you're an ESL speaker, something I'm sure many of us have experienced, and it becomes difficult. I do think we should still give it our best shot. Maybe mention below when they ask for extra comments that this is a difficulty you faced because of XYZ barrier. If you get selected, it's always something you can work on as a conversation within the team as well. So I don't think barriers just mean that you do not apply to anything at all. That's all I want to say.
No, I completely agree about the women and gender minorities and other, and people even from various backgrounds not necessarily backing themselves, and they definitely should. So that's a good one. Stewie, what about you?
Sorry, just call me Stewie. I'd just like to echo that the points so far have been fantastic. I don't have anything super insightful to add on top of those. I guess 2 things which came to mind, which haven't been mentioned so far, is firstly, and I think this is true with any application, you want to try to the best of your ability to have an idea of what they are asking for. And I don't mean just obviously the words which are written on the paper, or the application, but things such as what level of detail you should go into, how much specificity you should add, things such as word count as well, if that's not provided. I think those things may make or break your application, in terms of, whether, say, you've applied and perhaps you haven't written as much because you thought that was what was requested, whereas somebody else has written more, and that is actually what was requested. So if you are in a position to sort of ask those sort of questions about the application process, then I would encourage you to do so. Obviously, that won't always be the case, and it won't always be appropriate in the circumstances, but the most that you can sort of at least think from the perspective of the person who will be assessing the applications will be to your benefit. The second point I would say is something which I think is pragmatic, especially if and where application processes become more prevalent. which is to say something I've found useful in the past is, and this apologies if this is common sense, but I would usually extrapolate the form into, say, a Word document, and then I would have the prompts from the Word document, from the application in a Word document, and then I would answer the questions underlined under those questions, which are now in the Word document or whatever your word processing tool is. That isn't just to sort of protect against you if your internet drops out or you lose the form or whatever. The reason why I'm bringing this up is it's useful if you have future applications to have that base where you can look at and refer to, and you can sort of build off or build upon some of those more generic answers or descriptions of emotions and attitudes or approaches to certain things, and that's something which you can again, it could combine with that feedback that we talked about earlier on your application. You can sort of develop those responses going into the future. That's not to say, obviously, that you should have a generic application and reuse the same sentences over and over again, but it is to say that you can sort of start with that as a base for each application and tailor that after you sort of got those words on paper. And I think that might also help to, in some narrow instances, sort of demystify the application process as well and make it at least a little bit less burdensome going forward. Thanks.
Thanks for that. I definitely think those are useful comments. And I think some things that might seem very obvious are in fact not. I mean, saving your thing to a Word doc can also help with just like checking word count and spelling errors and things like that. I remember applying for Thailand. I was just like so like gung-ho, and then I realized that there was like a word count that I'd exceeded by like 1,000 words and then had to cut a bunch of content. So definitely pay attention to those things. So yeah, good shout. Helen, are you still? Yes. You've just obviously been through a process yourself of applying for things, and again, you obviously did well enough to get your sort of first CA gig recently. So do you have any kind of reflections from that process?
Yeah, so what I recommend is like make it very specific to the tournament that you are going into. So for KCL, I very specifically talked about the fact that I'm tutoring students that have a lot of experience with World Schools debating, that I coached kids, that I judged schools tournament before. So just make sure that you're like useful for this tournament. Or I have applied to multiple women's tournaments, and then also go into detail that you want to be doing this women's tournament because you have made your own experience with women's and gender minority tournaments and you enjoyed it very much, all of these different things. So make like very sure that the people that you are applying to realize that number one, you are qualified for this specific tournament and not just for any tournament. But also this is like with any job application as well, make sure that you really want this DCAship and not just any DCAship. So when you just like stand out by making sure that you're like really good for this one and like really ambitious and interested in this one, you're much more likely to be like given a chance. That being said, I agree with Stuart on the like having like a format kind of thingy. So I have a big note on my computer where I have like answers to the different questions, which I then will just adapt to the different tournaments that I am going to. This also applies to achievements. So if you are a person who has a bunch of judge breaks, so I'm currently at 14 BP judge breaks, I will swap around the judge breaks that I have. So obviously like the big ones go into everything. But when I apply to a women's tournament, I rather put in the fact that I've also broken at 2 women's and gender minority tournaments before, to just like show that you kind of also really interested in those specific formats into this. And the other thing is something that a lot of people appreciate in your application, and the feedback that I've also got, because either I did it wrongly or because I did it right, is to go into nuance with those things that you are doing. So don't just say round 1 needs to be more balanced, but say why round 1 needs to be more balanced than possibly round 3 or something like this. But also like specifically onto the stress testing thing. Like don't just say it needs to be accessible to everyone, but also point out that you might want to be stress testing it by giving it to a novice who has completely different experience than you as a DCA, or give it to somebody who speaks worse English than you do, because specifically like the language barrier kind of thing is something that a lot of people who speak English natively don't get, or people who have different access issues to the English language than I do as a German speaker. they have. So those kind of things like are first of all obviously important if you're CAing, but it's also something that the people like to see in your application, because it shows that you have like a deeper understanding of the situation, that you don't only know, oh, the motion needs to be accessible, but it also needs to be accessible on those different kind of reasons. So I think this has helped quite a lot. And the other thing is just like fill out everything. If you have time for the tournament and if you want to do the tournament, put your name out into that, because this is also the thing. You're more likely to be considered for another tournament if the people know your name. Like I have applied to, I think now the third tournament that Lovro is CAing. I've not gotten a response from any of these, but this is kind of the thing, like people will remember your name if you fill out more of them. So the first one might fail, but then maybe they remember you. Oh, we thought about giving them the chance in like the last tournament. Hey, give them the chance now. So like even if you fail into like the application and it doesn't go through the way you want, it's still a learning thing. Like Namita already said that you learn from the responses that you get, and also feel comfortable asking the people for the responses, because the CAs, most of them are really happy to give you the responses. Like I've gotten amazing help from Jess, from Enting, like from very different and very, very experienced CAs about like what I can do better. And that has helped immensely. What also has helped a lot is talking with other people who have applied to DCA, to like chat with the people who went through it, like what did they say, specifically also with like talking to the people who then got the DCA ship and you didn't, to make like clear what they did better than you. And then also always change your answers from every application. And yeah, this is like, be specific to the tournament that you do and don't undersell you. There is this segment very often which says, why do you want to be CAing this tournament? Don't undersell you. Say you worked very hard to be a good debater and judge. I want to do this. Like all of these different things, like being very modest with your experience there just doesn't really help. Like you do need to show that you really want to be doing this, which is something which is really hard for me. And I did it wrong like the first 3 applications I did through. But just like the more confident you are in yourself, that does help the judges to also be confident within the application that you send out.
Yeah, that's definitely a thing. And no, good tips. And like, I think the why you want to do this question is actually really important. And not all CAs are the same, but like I'm a massive softie. And if I'm looking at a DCA application and someone explains to me how much it means to them, like that to me is actually important. Not only because like I want to kind of reward that passion, but if someone wants it really badly, that probably means they will also be reliable and dependable at the competition, because you know, that this is important to them, you know? So I think that's definitely true. Might stay with you and then work backwards. I sort of want to know, the next thing is kind of about navigating, I guess, interpersonal dynamics on Adj cores, particularly when, you know, you might be on an Adj core for the first time, or you might be, you know, it might be your third time, or it might be on a circuit with people that you're less familiar with. And, you know, those people may or may not be more senior than you. How do you, or have you gone about navigating some of those things? And, you know, any tips on that more broadly, I suppose? Yeah.
So the first big thing, and the one thing, so I panicked about a lot of different things. The first thing I panicked about was the differentiation of DCA to CA, and like, what does this D actually mean into like the situation you are in? And this kind of differs to the CAs who are CAing and who are like CAs without the D before it. Most of them think that it's just like an arbitrary thing and has only to do with this application. So most of them think that because you are the DCA, that doesn't make you like less of a CA. There are some CAs who believe that there should be a differentiation between DCA and CA. So I would make sure that you know what your CAs believe that the DCA differentiation should be. The CA team I was on, they just didn't care about the DCA application, and I did feel constantly like being a full part of the team, which was great. The second thing that I can advise you on is ask the experienced people on the team. So I was with Joseph Lewis, Path, and Ifa, whose name I can't pronounce, and don't try to. So like people who have done quite a bunch of CA shifts before, and like what helped me was just like asking them, like, what do you expect from me? what am I supposed to be doing here? And they're very happy to answer these questions. Like, they want you to do well, because it's like, number one, in their own benefit if the DCA does well on their first try, but also just because they picked you in the DCA application, so they kind of also want you to do well within this. So I can just recommend really asking the people to be doing this. And the third big thing is, like, only because it's your first or second time doesn't mean that you are necessarily worth it. You are less experienced, but that doesn't mean that your ideas are not also good contributions to this. So feel comfortable in engaging in the discussions before the tournament, at the tournament itself, and don't shy away from pointing out problems. So my CA team, for example, might have found me annoying that I consistently pointed out that we need to have a different gender balance on the panels, because this is something that, as somebody who started out debating very young as a woman, have something that I care about, that you make sure that you don't have an only male identifying panel in front of you, something like this. Just like make sure that you point out these things if you notice them. And only because the other CAs are more experienced than you doesn't mean that they just notice everything, but also because you might be less experienced, you do focus on different things, which does matter as well quite a lot. Like, all of these different things that might be like normal for somebody who does it like 20 times is not normal for you. So just like pointing out these things can be incredibly useful within the situation. So yeah, the biggest advice I can give is be confident. You were picked for a reason. You do have qualifications behind you, and just trust that the other people on your CA team most likely are going to be very nice people who want you to do well. And like, once you get that into your head, it's significantly less scary doing that.
Thank you for that. I definitely agree. Like, even if I think there are a lot of things that older CAs take for granted that I think newer CAs can often pick up. And it might even just be like having knowledge about a certain group of debaters or circuit that often like entrenched CAs overlook, like, hey, actually that judge is not bad, you just don't know them, or, you know, like random things like that. So yeah, anyway, Stuart, what about you? Or maybe you might be in the perspective of, this is not an age jab, but like being one of the more senior members on ADJCORE more recently, unless we're on the same ADJCORE, in which case I've got a few years on you still, but yeah, what about from your perspective?
Yeah, so I think most of my judging experience has been in-person debating, ADJCORE experience, which is obviously, I think, presents different challenges and different benefits to online ADJCORing. And I guess by that, I mean, mostly in the adjudication cores I've been on, I've either been, you know, friends or relatively decent acquaintances with the people who I've been on those adjudication calls with, which I think has important implications for things like conflict resolution and communication. Obviously, that is quite different in online context, especially if there's an application process where you might be paired with people who you have not, you know, communicated with much before, or have not communicated with before in person. So I think it's important just to keep that in mind at the first instance. I think one thing, or a couple of things I would say is, first of all, it is an unfortunate reality that people on adjudication calls will have differing levels of commitment to that tournament and to that adjudication call. That'll be due to, you know, a myriad of factors, such as, you know, their age, their experience, what else they've got going on in their life, what else they've got going on with debating at the moment. So for you, it might be your first or second tournament, and, you know, it is a huge thing for you to be on that adjudication call. But for them, you know, you might be Jessica Muslim, who's, you know, been on the adjudication core of too many tournaments that you could even count. So I think and this isn't to say this is true of Jess, of course, but you will find, unfortunately, sometimes the more senior members on adjudication cores can, you know, may not be as energetic or invested in it as you, which really does suck, especially if you are, you know, quite enthusiastic and ready to get involved. And I think that really actually, the point that Helena made about, you know, holding people to account is definitely important in that context, whereby, you know, you may think you're stepping out of your bounds by telling somebody more senior, you know, hey, we've got to do this, or we should be doing that, or, you know, shouldn't we be, you know, doing the draw or something like that. But it actually is really important that you do that, because some people will unfortunately not have the same level of commitment of you, even though on paper they really should. I would say just on that, I think if you are, it is your first time on an adjudication core, or you haven't been on many adjudication cores before, most people are generally nice people in the debating community, and they won't expect you to be perfect in things such as motion setting or draw allocation or Adj allocation, stuff like that. So if you do, make a mistake, or you're not entirely as efficient as others might be or might seem, don't beat yourself up about it. Everybody goes through it, and it's a totally normal part of the learning process. I would just say, just generally, conflict resolution is so important on adjudication cores, because you will end up having disputes about certain things, and the main one being, from my experience, is particularly for the more sizable tournaments I've been on the adjudication core with, is about motions. People can get quite personally attached to their motions, and that can be really difficult to navigate, particularly when you get in a position where, you might have a motion on a particular motion set, somebody else might have a motion on that same motion set, and you can only pick one. And that does make this it quite, at times, honestly uncomfortable dynamic for you to navigate, where you're trying to rationally and reasonably and objectively assess each other's motions. I think, communication in that context is so important, and talking people, if it's an online tournament, having a call, whether that's in front of everyone or a side call or something like that, is so important. Obviously the analogy to an in-person tournament would be you would talk in person, and that would be to your benefit as well. But, in lieu of that, you should try and make it as much of a personal communication and conversation as you can. I would say one thing which I took into that, or in that context, which I've applied, is that I have at times picked my battles, particularly with things such as motions. That isn't to contradict what Helena said about things such as gender representation on panels, because obviously that is a battle that you should fight if your co-adjudication core members are not up to standard in that regard. But for me personally, an example was when I was on the adjudication core of the Australian Easters competition. It was the first major tournament which I had been on the adjudication core for, and I didn't end up, a few of the DCAs didn't end up getting what would on paper be the fair allocation of motions compared to other members of the team. And to a degree, that was perhaps due to the quality of our motions. To a degree, perhaps it was due to the dynamics on the adjudication core. The point was, for me personally, I wasn't really on that adjudication core for the purpose of making people debate my ideas. So I wasn't, I sort of was like, well, I'm not going to really push super hard on this because it's not something that I personally care that much about. That isn't to say that you shouldn't do that in certain instances or in some instances, but it is just, I guess, a personal decision about how much you want to push on certain things and certain topics, and which battles are important for you and which things you're happy to trade off for the sake of the dynamic. Obviously, in an ideal world, you would be able to have a rational discussion about every motion and every decision, but unfortunately, debaters are humans, and they're often imperfect humans. So this is something I think in reality you often have to come up across. I think one other bit of advice is it might also be worth, if you do have to deal with somebody in adjudication core who is a bit difficult to deal with, it might also be worth having a quick message to somebody who's been on an adjudication core with them before, who might not be on your current adjudication core with them, but has CA'd with that person in the past. So sort of maybe asking them, and saying, hey, Stuart does this on adjudication cores. Did you find that, bothersome? How did you deal with it? And they might be able to give you some help as well. I'll leave it there because I'm sure people have better and more important things to say, but I hope that helps somewhat.
No, I think that definitely is all very useful. And I guess my sort of reflection on what you said in terms of motion specifically is that, again, like newer people to Adj cores can still have very useful perspectives on this. Like if you're a top debater, it probably, over time, it probably becomes lost on you, just like how that motion plays out in lower rooms, for example. And that is a perspective that you can definitely bring in those discussions. Namita, what about you?
I actually have a lot of stuff to talk about in this question. I'm going to echo some of the stuff that was said earlier, although I've never really faced issues about conflicts within Adj cores. I do think given the nature of Adj cores, and obviously there are quite significant power dynamics, or even if not power dynamics, just circuit dynamics between individuals, specifically because it's online. So like, it's very rare that two people from the Adj core are from the same area. I just do think it's sort of important, just like in the introductions, to have sort of like an icebreaker thing, just to get all of the tension out of the way. It doesn't matter how you do it. You can talk about food, music, I don't know, have someone strum a guitar. We did that for genders. I think Nicholas Lozano was playing the guitar and everything was like super chill. And that was one of the first important Adj cores that I'd gotten, so I was super tense about it, but that really eased the air. So I just think, yeah, if you're sort of someone who's been on Adj core before, just to make sure that the newer people sort of get comfortable and aren't feeling that high degree of pressure. I do think also then, as mentioned earlier, if you have different strengths and different weaknesses applying on Adj core, even if motion setting in terms of what the wording should be, or maybe the placement of the motion isn't your best bet, it still probably means that you have significantly good ideas, even if you don't know how to phrase them. So I think my best suggestion would be to reach out to like the senior members of the Adj core and go, hey, this is a super cool motion idea that I have. I don't know how to phrase it into a way that can be made into a debate, but this is definitely something that has scope for argumentation. And then you can just explain in general what the scope is, and collectively people can work on the phrasing. I think this just teaches you how to phrase motions when you're thinking in your own time as well. But also, I think if people expect only 100% finished motions, then it just deters people from coming up with new ideas, because we often almost don't know how to finish them perfectly, as Stuart said before. So I just do think this raw ideation and things like that should also be discussed, as opposed to like just having a finished motion set, filtering out the motion set. That's standard stuff. But yeah, just if possible, take out some time to have some new fun ideas that maybe not fully finished, but is something that you can implement. Echoing earlier again, obviously you need to figure out your strengths and weaknesses, not as an independent member on the panel, but perhaps someone in relation to the core Adj panel as a whole, especially with relation to the tournament. So one of the comps that I did in January earlier, that's COEP, I was once again the most inexperienced member on the CAP. We had Hadar, Lovro Estelle, and Akash Raj, who's a really established Indian debater. So in that specific competition, my most valuable contribution was, because I have a lot of experience in equity over the past, I was able to gauge why some teams may not respond to some arguments properly. That significantly helped in contributing towards how motions are phrased, or whether or not we should hold a motion, like we should make a motion in the set or not, if it might become too problematic. So I do think even if you haven't 100% fully come up with a motion, that doesn't mean that you have to shy away from discussing it, because you always have, let's say, you know people personally, or maybe you just know that some people are not going to get a grasp of a concept, or they're just going to be, sorry to use the term, assholes about that concept. So you probably don't want to keep it for your own comfort. And the last struggle I would face, because I haven't had really struggles on Adj core, is probably an Adj core org-com sort of a tussle that you face, especially in online tournaments, where it seems that org-coms have vastly different expectations. And because of circuit differences, the Adj core might amend to preferences of like the most senior member circuit or the most experienced member circuit, which is fine. But I do think that clarity between what the org-com wants versus what the Adj core is willing to give is probably something that should be discussed beforehand. Otherwise, it just leads to massive delays in the tournament, especially with a lot of conveners in the online era, in newer circuits, often being very new people, but they obviously also want to have a say in their own tournament. So they don't just completely hand it off to the core adjudication. They do try to insert their own decision. So I do think an important balance of how is this person going to react to it, versus obviously keeping in mind that you have certain Adj core duties, such as, I don't know, getting a few extra judges that are good because it's going to make your tournament better. It's just something that you have to stand behind, because ultimately you do owe it to your participants, because that's where you're getting your recognition from. So I just think those are a couple of conversations that people should have, instead of, I don't know, classic Adj coring. I wasn't really there, so I don't know much about that.
No, I think that's all very useful. Thank you so much for that. And finally, Njuguna, are you? You're still here. Great.
Yeah, I'm here.
Go for it.
Right. So I have like two different optics. I've seen things from two different sides. I've been CA at physical comms and not just DCA, like CA, the one on top. And then when it came to online, I'm now the DCA. And I think Helena is right. Sometimes the dynamics are usually there's a hierarchy, sometimes there are none. I always try and believe there is one. It helps me work, especially among the more experienced Adj Core members. So I could probably comment on both depending on my experience that could help someone when you get those positions. What has the experience been like? During the physical competitions, when I used to be the one who was CA, there are a couple of things that I thought were extremely important that I needed to do, and I think everyone needs to do. The first thing is that you always need to be proactive. I think Stuart is right. People have different experience levels, people have different commitment issues and all that. But to the extent that you're the one who is a CA, right, the tournament relies on you very heavily to perform, not just at adjudication capacity, but because you're the one, you're like keeping the cog moving. Things like time management, things like solving conflict, all these things rely on you. So you must be very proactive and you must basically be moving around to make sure that everything, you're part of the OGCOM. The OGCOM relies on you. So you need to always work together to make sure that the tournament is running smoothly. Sometimes it means dealing with issues that are beyond your scope as a CA. I think you should always be ready for that. Also establish good relationships with the moving parts of the tournament. The tab, you don't want the tab annoyed at CAP. You don't want OGCOM mad at CAP because people are eating lunch at 3 p.m. instead of 1. Always make sure that you've developed good relationships with everyone. I know a South African tournament that OGCOM and CAP almost like chilled each other because rounds were ending at 11 p.m., almost midnight, and people haven't eaten dinner. And debaters are mad at OGCOM, but it's not OGCOM's fault because CAP delayed the tournament. I mean, there are a lot of moving parts. You need to always make sure that you're in sync with all these parts. The minute you almost destabilize one part of the tournament, everything else could go down, and usually that just makes the tournament not a great experience. I think you should always try and establish good relationships. Last thing, I think some of the last things with this is you should always have good conflict resolution skills. I don't know why physical tournaments always have conflict, and they always come to the CAs. Whenever there's a conflict, they don't go to equity. Usually they, in fact, in our circuit, equity is not there. We really don't have equity. It's usually just CAP's equity, CAP sometimes is tab. So everyone comes to your problems. You need to have good interpersonal conflict. I think if you must learn how to deal with conflict, you need to do it early. Do a course on whatever course sites. Just learn how to deal with conflict because conflict always comes to you. I've seen tournaments where I was CA, where one of the other CAs just sparks a big problem because someone comes with conflict and they respond very badly to that. It becomes really, really bad because if at the top, people feel like you're not listening to them, trust me, they're not going to listen to you after that. It's going to become a huge mess. It's going to be, you're going to hear all the crazy stories people can come up with, bias, what, and I think that becomes very problematic. Also, I think that idea of keeping the environment relaxed to the other CAP members could actually help. I wouldn't even go much into that. And I think from experience, you must always be willing to just go the extra mile with that. So with physical tournaments, I think that's what I have to say, that some of those things are important, things like conflict, proactivity, and making sure that the tournament moving parts are all working and you interact with all of them just to make sure everything works as perfectly as possible. I've been to a tournament where I think recently at a very major regional competition and none of the CAP members actually were there. It was very, like literally the tournament was being run by the DCAs. So you must also be willing sometimes to step up. You know, if really you might need be, you must always be willing and flexible, you know, just to be able to take up roles that maybe you're not too experienced in, and, you know, always learning. So that was my experience with physical CAP ships, especially in my circuit, where a CAP member is almost like everything at that tournament. You're interacting with everything. You're not going to be saying, oh, you go to equity, they'll solve your problem. No. Or go talk to OGCOM. No, you must have answers. And I think that's something that is important. In the online environment, it's been fairly different. I think most of the time, you're always with more experienced members. And that's probably for me. I've always been in a CAP where everyone above me is probably more experienced than I am. And I think some of the rules that I've used, the first one, I think I can share like 5, is always be willing to learn. So what I tend to do is that whenever the CAP meetings are going on, I have a notebook with me. I always take notes because some of these lessons that I'm learning here, I can apply in the next CA ship. Even I can use in my future applications. So always be learning and always be taking notes. I remember when we were motion testing for things like Southampton and they were running some crazy ideas and I couldn't see how they work, but I wanted to see how they were testing those motions because I didn't see how they could work. And, you know, just take notes and see how people think, how people do. The next time they ask you about testing a motion on an application, you already have more ideas that you can share with regards to this. So always be learning and always be trying to pick up as much information as possible. It could help you in the future. Secondly, be a water carrier. And I think being helpful, as Namita says, is very important. You might not be able to be the best motion set on the group, right? But you have other strengths that you can be able to use. So for example, don't just be there, like be proactive. So one of the things I tend to challenge myself is to try and do things like briefings, prepare the briefings if you must, or do something like just whatever work comes up that you feel that you have the capacity to do, just assist, do something, be proactive and be willing to just learn from the experience. Even if you've never done it before, prepare it, tell them, look, how do you think of this briefing? It's fine. Okay, let's go. So that helps you be able to learn different things about the whole experience. The other thing is, and this is very difficult. I know I'm going to make it sound simple, but it's actually very difficult. And it's ask. If you don't know, just ask. I remember at Manchester, there were very experienced guys there. And it felt like they were moving at 100 kilometers per hour. And I'm here at 10. Like things are just moving. And I'm like, what's like, it's just moving. At one point, you might be able just to say, guys, I really don't understand what's going on. Please explain to me X, Y, Z. What is this? So like they would use jargon that you don't understand. Oh, we need to stack rooms. I'm like, what? Oh, but no, -5 or +1. I'm like, what's going on? Like, be willing to ask. Don't remain there in your ignorance to the extent that you could actually be using that opportunity to learn. The reason why you're there, the reason why the pictures at DCA, and one of the things I think is very important is that you must be willing to learn. If you're not willing to learn, you're wasting your time there. So always take the opportunity to learn. If you don't know anything, just ask. It looks simple, and I think different biases play out. It could be that inferiority complex. It could be maybe your identity as a person, maybe just the way you are. You just aren't that, you might feel uncomfortable asking, but don't ever let that stop you. Just ask if you don't understand anything. I remember I had to ask a million questions to these people because yeah, it felt like they were moving at 100 kilometers per hour. But even in that situation, always take the opportunity to learn and always take the opportunity, to ask those questions. After the session, always reflect. I think that's something I would also advise. Just if you take notes like me, reflect on those notes. Always try and see and reflect on those things. It helps like go through what you've learned and help it stick. Also try and play out your strengths on the team. Namita has already talked about this. You might not be able to get the motions that yours are not that great, but there are other things you can do. So maybe you're good at motion songs. That's actually very important. Maybe that's what you're good at. Like maybe contribute in terms of motion songs, tabbed, equity. You can always find something that you can contribute to it. It doesn't have to be that one thing that is the one that is so shiny. Just find a way that you can be able to contribute. Lastly, and I think this is very important, be dependable. I think it's very important that you're dependable if you're a DCA or even a CA. If you're not dependable, like you're wasting everyone's time, but also affecting the tournament. Be there, available, not just for the tournament, but also the meetings prior to the tournament. Sometimes these meetings run, I remember there was a meeting that ran 5 hours. Be there. Just always be dependable and always show up. I know it's gonna be hard, but always have that element of dependability. Even if it means sacrificing your sleep or whatever it is you must sacrifice, dependability is very important for an Adj Core member. Don't be that guy who says, oh, I'm only available for round 1 and 2 in a 7-round tournament. I mean, seriously, why are you a DCA then? So don't be that person, always be dependable. So that's probably my few cents on the 2 different types of experiences that I've had.
No, awesome. Thank you for that. And I think keeping an open mind to always learn is very important, as you said. And even as, even myself, I've, done this for a while, but I still feel like I can learn new things, like something, for example, something very simple that Claudia taught me was like, if you've got a massive Adj Core, do not like do Facebook messages. It's just chaos. Set up a Discord server. And I was like, oh yeah, that like makes so much sense. It's just like a tiny thing that I had not, thought of before. So I'm gonna go first to Stu for this one, just to mix it up a little bit. And I'm gonna combine the next set of questions that I had. The first was about personal reflections, like if there was a CA experience where you would have done something differently, but then also thinking more broadly, what do you think Adj Cores in general need to be doing differently? You can answer one of those questions or both of those questions, or kind of like focus on the thing that like you feel more strongly about, catch all. So I'll start with you.
I don't have anything super profound to say, probably because you put me on the spot, but hopefully everybody after can think of something more clever than mine. I think the big difference I've seen between the good adjudication cores and the bad adjudication cores I've been on is just the element of proactivity. And, it's hard because it's not necessarily something that you can teach or something that you can necessarily mandate that effectively from people. But the ones that I've seen have operated well are those where, the Google Doc gets created pretty quickly. People start putting their motions in pretty quickly. Somebody's keeping track of a timeline, and the timeline doesn't slack too much. I guess it's just general project management sort of things. I think, obviously this is also somewhat related to, say, the sort of size and stature of the tournament might be a factor. The timing of it in the debating calendar might be a factor as well. But I would say that the ones which I've seen which haven't been that effective have been those ones where, you don't have motions ready till the day before or the day of at some points. And often I've been as a participant at tournaments and, you can tell that the CAP hasn't organized the next motion, or, you'll ask a friend sort of like, oh, why are they going outside? And they'll say, oh, they're, doing the draw again or something. And it's never a great look. So I guess the way you can sort of translate that into practical advice, I guess this really is echoing some of the stuff that we've already said, but is to just try to be as proactive as you can, and getting your hands dirty everywhere that you can, and filling those gaps. And it might not necessarily be you doing that yourself. It might be you poking somebody or prodding somebody on the team to get that done. I'm sorry, that's a really repetitive answer, but I hope it does help sort of synthesize some of those thoughts that we've already gone over. I think that's definitely what stands out for me.
No, that's all good. Brevity is also helpful, so don't stress about that. Thanks, Stu. I might go next to Namita, if that's okay. Your experience or anything more broadly that you think Adj Cores could do better or different?
Yeah, like I said, less about Adj Cores. I think maybe more about OCOMs, but I do think Adj Cores as well can push for this, as I alluded earlier. There seems to be a repetition in Adj Cores, which of course is not a bad thing, because I do think there still needs to be a considerable amount of experience. But at the same time, I still think that experience needs to be passed down to the next generation of people who are actually going to be end up Adj Coring in, let's say, the next 2 or 3 years. I don't know how long you guys are going to stick around, Jess, but I do think it's important for you to push back. So I think even in the extent where, let's say, someone super experienced is approached, I do think they should just always go ahead and be like, hey, can we have at least maybe one developmental CA? Obviously, if you don't want to compromise the position, because even if you consider them quote unquote dead weight in motion setting, they probably still have a lot to learn. And they're still going to be a really good judge. So it isn't really harming the composition of the CA team. But on my own personal reflections, I would probably say that what I am guilty of doing is always being the most inexperienced person on Adj Core is probably just doubting myself. So I, even in motions that aren't my own, but I do have significant amounts of contribution, I usually just let everyone in the room speak and then be like, oh, this is what I was gonna say. Maybe I have one more sentence to add, instead of actually pushing my thoughts to the front. That's definitely something that I would have done better in hindsight. And I shouldn't be so nervous is probably my takeaway from it, because everyone's nervous. Like, the first couple of times, so it doesn't really matter.
Awesome, thanks for that. Helena, I might go back to you. Yeah, from your, I mean, you again, you might not have quite as many experiences to reflect on in terms of what you would have done differently, but certainly, I mean, you've been from the perspective of interacting with a lot of Adj cores as well. So I'm sure you have reflections on what they could be doing better or different.
Yes, so I don't have much experience as a CA. I am currently organizing my 8th debate tournament and the 4th online tournament. So I have a lot of experience on that level. So like on what Namita just said about like engaging with Adj Core and ORCOM, which I think is like one of the things that I see at a lot of different tournaments. What my friends are telling me and what I have experienced is that there's unfortunately quite a lack of transparency very often between ORCOM and Adj Core, which either is because the Adj Core, like this is not the Adj Core I was on. They were all very lovely, but experience I've made is that the Adj Core sometimes think that they were specifically chosen. They like donate their time to this and therefore like don't respect the Adj Core, the ORCOM to the degree that they need to. On the other hand, especially with inexperienced ORCOMs, is that they don't talk enough to the Adj Core and therefore do not let the Adj Core know what the things they need to have all of these different things. So one of the big things, which I also think is an ability that all of the people who want to do CAships is to know how to engage with the ORCOM, but specifically also to respect your ORCOM and give your ORCOM the information that they need. Same the other way around. So like one of the biggest things I think should change is just the fact that people need to work closer with their Adj Core. The same as Macharia already said, like with the tab, like it's so important that you have a good relationship with your tab, include your tab master into all of the decisions for both ORCOM and CAs. Like that's my biggest thing, more transparency between the moving factors into this. About my personal experience, what I think I would have liked to do different is, as Namita already said, be more confident, not be as scared. Like this was first of all not good for my heart the entire tournament, just the fact that I was panicked constantly, but also it doesn't help. Like it just makes you scared more about saying the wrong thing, and you're more likely to say the wrong thing if you're scared within the situation. So just like being more confident with the ideas that I have, like the one motion that was originally from me and was said at the tournament went completely wrong. Like it was a horrible debate that was in, but this is just like one of those learning factors as well. I'm happy that I set this motion because I think that it's a good idea into this. So just like taking a learning factor onto this, not be panicked as much about whether or not your contributions are like perfect quality, because they don't have to be. So just be a bit more confident in myself in hindsight would have been probably a good idea.
Awesome, thanks. And you know, it is again a bit of a, frankly, a gendered thing. Is like women often just like confidence here, and you don't need to. So it's a good thing to kind of just remind people about, even if it seems obvious. I think just reinforcing that message is really useful. And you know, I'm losing track. I think it's just the time of night. You are. Yeah, so anything from your perspective, different, general, whatever.
What would I have done better? I think there are a few mistakes I've made. I always try and own up to them. There is one thing I think we always need to realize at CAP is that optics matter. How things appear, not just to you, but how they appear on the other side is also very important. And when you make decisions, you always need to consider the optics of them. And I think there are a couple of decisions, both from the past and even, you know, currently, that I wish maybe I had made different choices. So I think one of the things that I think probably should always be considered by an Adj Core is the optics of a decision. I remember in one tournament, I think somebody failed to look at the clashes, and you know, it was a final and you have someone from an institution judging a team in that institution, and it's a final. Probably the judge had the highest scores at the tournament, but the optics just don't look good. So you can't defend such decisions. I think also how you respond to equity claims by certain schools and how you respond to equity claims from other schools and how those look. I think just general optics, especially when you're at a physical comp, it's very important for you to always consider the optics of decisions. I think that's fairly very important. I think the other thing that needs to be done better, Namita has done enough activism for us. We need more people that are not repetitive, even if it's just as a developmental person. Just pick one and, you know, at least move with them so that in WUDC 2025 or 26, Jess is not sitting somewhere and saying, oh, the quality has gone down. I mean, if it has, then it's your fault that that did happen, because no one tried to create that development path for many other people. And I think it was a problem that has happened for many years. I remember the first World UDC African CA came like 2 years ago, and World UDC has been happening for, 2016, I think that was charity. Had been happening for 30 something years, and there was a circuit there. I think just the consideration that there are a lot of people that need to be thought out. I think nowadays we're seeing more diversity in the selections. I'm not trying to bash WDC. I'm just giving an example of just how diversity works. You always need to consider other regions, you need to consider other places, because they also are important. We need to develop those circuits. I think Adj Core can also be activists for other circuits, and I think they have enough power to do that, and I think they should probably do it a bit more. Also on motions, I think there's a lot of bias with regards to motions. I remember when we are discussing maybe certain regions, the IR optics or the accessibility is fine, but when you're going to discuss other regions, oh no, this motion is inaccessible. Sure, that's because no one is going to read about them if you don't set motions on those regions. So go out there and give them hard topics that are inaccessible, but that way they'll get to learn about different places. I mean, I'm tired of sitting in debates and my entire continent is generalized as one country, guys. It feels bad sometimes to listen to Africa is corrupt and that's your only response to Gov case. I mean, it feels very bad. So I think doing more diversity also on motions, going to niche issues in different regions. I remember a final in Australia and the motion is about Singapore split from, I think, Malaysia, and I had no idea anything about ASEAN history. And I remember after that round, I flopped badly, but I had to go after and read afterwards about that. So also with motions, we can do a lot of activism, not really activism, but just getting people to read about different regions. The whole point of the sport is to learn. So to the extent, I think ADJCORE can really do a lot more to try and get people to read about different regions. Every IR debate doesn't have to be about China and US and Europe and EU and NATO. We can also talk about other issues in other regions and not care about accessibility, because the only way they learn is if they go and read, which is why I always commend ADJCOREs that go on to different regions. The ADJCORE that put us in Singapore and Myanmar and the split in a final with 3 African teams and 1 Asian team really got us learning about, I had to go read the entire history of Asia. So I think that really helps. And yeah, I think there's nothing else I can really add. Be more assertive. I know there are a couple of issues I had very strong opinions about, but I never really could express them because I always felt inferior to the other people. So probably wishing that I could have been more assertive. So also, even if you're a DCA, don't be afraid of getting your opinions be known, even if they are probably not the popular opinion. You could be right and everyone else could be wrong. So always be willing to express your opinion, not in a violent way or in a condescending way, in a way that just communicates what needs to be communicated. So I think that's it from me.
Awesome, thanks so much. And I totally agree about the kind of like double standard that we sometimes have about motions. It's like everyone's expected to know every intricacy about US politics, but you know, God forbid we set a motion about Latin America or Africa or different parts, you know, like it's definitely the case. So this will be the last question, and I sort of, I guess, encourage people to keep this one brief. I'll keep with you and then sort of work back. And then if one has any questions from the audience, we can shout out. But the final question, and as I said, I'll keep with you, Njuguna, is ADJCORing. Do you enjoy it? Do you recommend it? What's like your personal kind of summary and any kind of final reflections?
I definitely recommend it. I think I always, and this is my philosophy, I recommend people to become holistic debaters. Don't be career anything, be very holistic. So I definitely always recommend people to ADJCORE, but I also recommend you to do equity. I also recommend you to try tab. I also recommend you to try and speak. Don't be, I think one of the things I learned during, like we were going through IA applications, and you'd always measure the strength of an IA just by how balanced it is. Good speaking CV, good judge CV, probably a better judge. So I think it's always important to try and make yourself more holistic. But specifically to Adj Core, I think I definitely do recommend you to do it. There's so much to learn out there. And I'm always, and I'm sorry I keep calling them out, but I'm always so grateful for those Adj Cores that selected me and allowed me to work with them, whether it's Cornell, Manchester, or Southern, well, all these people, right? There's so much you learn from each and every individual within an Adj Core that you cannot get when you're just a judge or an IA. There's so much that goes into it that gives you so much perspective. Being an Adj Core member could help you be a better judge. Being an Adj Core member could probably help you be a better speaker because you understand the issues that Adj Core is looking for in motion setting and all those things. So I think always try and diversify your CV. Coach, I mean, diversify your CV and make yourself very holistic as a debater. And I think that's something that I would definitely recommend for you to do. Final reflections. I think we're doing much better. I'm not trying to without sounding like an activist. I think we can do better with regards to getting more and more people on Adj Cores. I don't think there's anything wrong with having a 5-person Adj Core instead of 3, just so that you can add 2 developmental people in your Adj Cores. I think there's very little to lose. I kid you not, some of the people who you could approach to be developmental CAs might not even need you to pay them. Like it's not even a financial cost. It's really just that people want to learn, but the opportunities are so few out there that there's really very little to go with. So all you rely on is your judging CV and everything. So I think more can be done to get more and more people included. I've always appreciated those who allow more and more people on their Adj Cores just so that they can train and develop other people. So we can do better, but we're doing well. I think that's my final reflection.
Yeah, no, I agree with the Adj Core size thing. I think, maybe a Adj Core of 9 is unmanageable, but there's no reason why we can't add 1 extra person or 2 extra people and, still keep maintain quality, but also just, again, have different perspectives there. Helena, did you enjoy your first experience? Do you hope to do more? What are your reflections?
Oh, I mean, horrible experience. Nobody should ever do it. No, it was incredibly much fun. So I had a huge lot of fun doing it the first time. Like, first of all, it is something that I've worked hard onto. Like, I've gotten so many things like on my judging CV just to be a good choice for a CA team, because this was important to me that I'm just like not only picked, but also picked because I'm qualified to be doing this. So it's something that I worked very hard towards being a good choice. So it was just like very rewarding that work that I put onto building my judge CV, because my speaking CV is significantly better than my judge CV, and I know that I'm a better speaker than a judge, but I've worked very, very strongly on being also very good judge choice into this. So it was definitely a great experience, and I had the great thing that I was on a very lovely panel on people. And the other thing is just that it's so fun to get like ideas through. I have a note which is just like motion ideas I want to be setting at some point. Some of the inspiration hits very weirdly. The most recent one was a meme about the genital positions of Star Trek characters. So ideas come from everywhere about like motions and all of these different things. And because I do have a bunch of ideas I want to be doing, it's just like so fun that you can get these ideas out. So yeah, it's super much fun. Make sure that you do have your qualifications. That does help, but like once you feel comfortable about this, do apply for everything. Also, you're probably qualified before you think that you are qualified, but like you do need some qualifications onto this, so work on them and then go apply for anything that has to do with CAing, because it's really much fun.
Awesome, thank you for that. Stuart, next. What about you?
Yeah, I'd just like to echo what's been said so far, particularly, the debating community can and should do better than it has historically, and that also that at a personal level, when you do, you should feel proud when you are selected to be on an adjudication course. So thanks to both for those points so far. I am kind of the opposite of Helena in a way, in that I think my speaking CV is much better than my adjudication CV. I've always thought that I'm a much better judge than a debater. And I think that really speaks to what I enjoy about being on the adjudication course, which is particularly the motions, not necessarily, setting motions in the sense of having my idea come to fruition, but I understand why people would enjoy that. But I think definitely the act of discussing motions with, bright, intelligent people on the adjudication core is incredibly rewarding. Seeing the ideas that other people come up with, workshopping motions and info slides, and that sort of stuff, I think, sort of getting in the weeds with the motions is something I've really, really enjoyed myself. A bit of like side advice I'd say in that area is, if you set a motion and some people don't like it, don't take it personally, because I think one of my best motions which I ever set is one that some people did not like because it was quite a technical economics motion. But and I do not take that personally. And I think if you do take feedback on your motions personally, that does not necessarily help you to improve as a motion setter and an adjudication core member into the future. Take it critically, take it dispassionately, and take it objectively, and I think you'll be better off for it into the future. And that also extends to your communication and engagement with other members of the adjudication core when you're discussing your motions as well. I definitely encourage people to apply for and take up adjudication core positions. I think not only will it obviously make you a better member of an adjudication core into the future, but it will also help you with your judging. It'll also, I think, help you with your speaking as well. In the same way that judging does, but also in a sort of separate way, because you do think about motions as a member of an adjudication core in a different way than you think of them as a judge. In terms of you think about things like balance, you go through the stress testing procedures and stuff like that. So if you are, more interested in speaking than you are in judging, I'd still recommend applying for education core positions. So thanks.
Awesome, thanks. That motion wasn't our digital services tax motion by any chance, was it?
That's the exact motion, yeah.
No, you should be salty. That was a great motion. People just don't know what they're talking about. No. And finally, over to Namita.
This is going to be fun because you gave me the power of having the last word. And not to be a bummer or anything, but I do think being on Adj Core is incredibly frustrating and tiring. Obviously, that does not mean that you should not do it, but because everyone's answers have been so idealistic, I will go ahead and say that it's a very, very tiring job. Sometimes it might make you frustrated, sometimes it might make you angry, but I think what actually makes everything better in the end, and the reason why you still enjoy it, is once everything is done and once all the tiredness has faded away, you actually see that people did enjoy the tournament. Obviously, there are always going to be some people that are salty losers or some people that just don't enjoy things. We don't care about them. You should focus on the ones that did enjoy it. And there's always going to be someone on Adj Core that you're friends with or that you're closer with compared to the rest of the Adj Core. It's always fun to go ahead and unwind with them. On reflections, I probably have the opposite experience of a lot of people here, in the sense that I very rarely speak. I've only recently picked speaking back up again, because I've gotten like more senior debaters to help me out and have that clarity of thought. My issue with speaking is just, I have a lot of things in my brain. I don't know how to frame them properly, which is why I'm not a very good speaker, even though I am considerably good judge. So I do think Adj Coring in that way really helps in terms of just getting the vaguest idea possible and making it into the most streamlined sentence that you can think of. Obviously, because motions can't be too long, otherwise nobody's gonna understand them. So I do think definitely if you have any difficulties, if you think you're plateauing in terms of speaking, I would definitely recommend just applying to an Adj Core if you have, if you think you're qualified enough, because just having those discussions and seeing, there's more than one perspective to an idea, or there's more than one context of an idea, is something that definitely helps you get back on track. And the last thing I would just say is, to everyone that's Adj Coring now, whether you're senior, whether you're new, I would probably, I don't know how to say this without sounding rude, but I would definitely want you guys to do a little bit more research into the circuits of the applications that you receive to judge, because I tend to see that there is a heavy bias towards some circuits, which might be fine because you know that those are qualified, but that should not come at the expense of you ignoring other circuits. So for example, when I started out, and now as well, a lot of judges from my circuit are ignored simply because you don't know what sort of tournaments you're at. I don't think that should be that big of an issue, because you do have tabs from 2-3 years ago. You can always look it up, see how big the competition was. see how competitive the competition was, just reach out to old ADJCOREs. I'm pretty sure they're always willing to talk about whether or not a person is good or not. So I do think those small little things that you can do probably just takes 10 minutes of your time reaching out, can just make, like, I don't know, make debating even more inclusive than it already is, but just motivate a lot of people that aren't quite motivated now because they think that their circuit isn't recognized well enough. Yeah, that's all I want to say.
Thank you for that. And I think it's, you know, I don't think it's too negative a note. I think people should be aware of what they're getting into, but you know, at the end of the day, it can be stressful, but usually for the most part, you do take away a positive experience. So that is good. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for your time. So if any of our panel do have to head off, please feel free. That is totally fine. But I will just check if, so yeah, thanks again. But if anyone from the audience does have any questions, please just unmute, shout out, type in the chat, and our panel can try to answer. Give you a minute. Does anyone have any questions? Don't be shy. Otherwise, there is a Discord. People can leave some questions there, and you know, people can do our best to get back to you. All right. Well, thanks very much. Oh, sorry, go. Was someone about to speak?
Yeah, I do have a question. Just in an online setting, like how have you been able to kind of make relationships with people that you're on ADJCOREs with? Because it's something I've personally struggled with.
Does anyone have any thoughts on that? Namita?
Yeah. So like I said earlier, I just think it's really important in the first ADJCORE meeting to sort of break the ice. So instead of being, we're just going to directly jump into motion meetings and stuff, it might just be helpful to talk about, I don't know, your favorite pop posting poll, your favorite piece of music, stuff like that. Stuff that, anything that sort of softens the boundary to like maybe say, oh, this is not only the most professional setting, but we can also just talk to this person about literally anything. Obviously, if you don't know this person at all before, this just helps immensely. But even if you do know this person before, I just think within that specific setting, because if you know one person, you probably don't know another person. So just as a group, it helps you bond and stuff like that. The second thing I would just say is really encourage you to just stay in contact with the people that you've been on ADJCORE with post the tournament as well. Just, I don't know, you don't have to be best friends with them, but every once in a while say, hey, or maybe make plans to do a tournament with them. It just helps you foster relations. And have good times, yeah.
Maybe to add as well, like one of the ways of how I apparently stay in contact is like making really cringy and strange posts on pop posting, just like generally talking with or like people about different things. Like there are a lot of ways of how you can make friends and contacts online, like even outside of the CAing kind of thing. So like, yeah, feel willing to just like engage in all of the different groups that we have there. But then also I just like with what Namita said, just like try to also talk with them about things that doesn't have to do anything with the CAing in and of itself, so that it makes it like a little bit looser and all of these things. Like this is the joke I put into the chat, like how we broke the ice was literally a longer discussion about how hippos move through water. Fun fact, they don't swim. So it's just like one of these things, and then just like stay in contact about something that happened that was funny. So with one of the co-CAs, I'm just sending really adorable TikToks of seals, which is just like our conversation right now. So like the conversation that you have with people and how you stay in contact doesn't have to be meaningful. It literally can be seal TikToks. But I can also just like recommend to do stay in contact. Also just make sure that it's not just about debating, because CAing should also be fun. So be willing to also talk about fun stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Any other reflections or questions?
I'm bad at it, so I can't advise.
That's all right. Well, we might leave it there just in the interest of time. Thank you again. I'm going to stop the recording now. Hopefully everyone found that very valuable.